What if the perfect party was a trap? Alara thought winning a contest to a celebrity's penthouse was a dream come true. But after one special drink from the charming star Lucas Kane, she woke up naked in his bed with no memory of what happened. He patted her cheek and told her, "You did it already." When she discovered he'd beaten a similar charge before, her nightmare was just beginning. Desperate and alone, Alara made a dangerous plan: to wear a hidden camera and walk back into the lion's den, not as prey, but as a hunter, setting her own trap. Disclaimer: this channel features fictional psychological stories created for emotional exploration and storytelling purposes. All characters and events are fictional. The dress was the color of champagne, a shimmering slip of fabric that made Alara feel like she was wearing liquid light. She kept smoothing it down over her hips, a nervous gesture Chloe caught immediately. "Stop it," Chloe whispered, linking her arm through Alara's as they stood before the soaring, polished doors of the penthouse. "You look amazing. We belong here." Alara wasn't so sure. Belong felt like a strong word for two college students who'd won these invites through a sketchy social media contest. But Chloe's confidence was a force of nature. The doors swung inward, and the sound washed over them first, a deep, throbbing bass line under a cloud of laughter, clinking glass, and 100 overlapping conversations. Then the light hit them. It wasn't normal light. It was golden and low, catching in the spray of a waterfall wall that flowed down one side of the living room, which was bigger than Alara's entire apartment building. Bodies swayed on a sunken dance floor. People lounged on white couches that looked like sculptures holding crystal glasses that gleamed like captured stars. The air smelled like expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and something sweet, vanilla or amber. "Wow," Alara breathed, the word lost in the noise. Chloe squeezed her arm, eyes wide. "Told you." They drifted in, trying to look casual, like they did this every weekend. A waiter in a crisp black jacket glided past with a tray of flutes filled with bubbling gold. Chloe snatched two, handing one to Alara. "Champagne probably costs more than my textbooks." Alara took a small sip. It was dry and sharp, exploding with tiny bubbles on her tongue. She watched the people. Beautiful people, all sharp angles and perfect smiles. Men in tailored suits that probably didn't come off a rack. Women in dresses that seemed painted on. And in the center of it all, holding court by the massive floor-to-ceiling window that framed the city's skyline, was him, Lucas Kane. In person, he was taller, broader. The television didn't do justice to the physical space he commanded. He was laughing at something a model thin woman said, his teeth very white against his smooth, dark skin. A championship ring glinted on his finger as he gestured with his drink. "Don't stare," Chloe hissed, but she was staring too. For a while they just floated. They danced a little in a corner, drank the champagne, and tried to absorb the impossible glamour of it all. Alara felt a giddy, dreamy lightness. This was a postcard from another life, a life of ease and sparkle. For these few hours, she wasn't a stressed-out student worrying about tuition and her waitressing tips. She was a girl in a champagne-colored dress at Lucas Kane's party. The dream shifted when he noticed her. She felt at first a prickling on the back of her neck. She turned from admiring the view, and his gaze was already on her, cutting through the crowd. He wasn't smiling broadly anymore. It was a smaller, more focused look. He murmured something to the people around him and began to move. A shark gliding through warm water. The crowd seemed to part for him. He stopped in front of them. Up close, he was even more imposing. "Chloe, right?" he said, his voice a smooth baritone. He'd remembered her name from the contest draw. Chloe beamed, nodding furiously. Then his eyes slid to Alara. "And you are?" "Alara," she said, her own voice sounding too thin. "Alara," he repeated as if tasting the word. "That's different, I like it." His smile was warm. "You two enjoying yourselves?" They both nodded, a little dumbly. "Good, the best is yet to come." He turned his attention fully to Alara. "Can I steal you for a second? I've got a bottle behind the bar that's too good to waste on this mob. A private toast." Chloe's eyes went even wider, shooting Alara a look that screamed, "Say yes!" It felt rude to refuse. It felt insane to refuse Lucas Kane. The dream was tilting, becoming personal. "Sure," Alara said. He placed a hand lightly on the small of her back, guiding her away from the dance floor, away from Chloe's envious gaze, towards a more secluded, book-lined study off the main room. The music faded to a dull thump here. It was quieter, intimate. A single glass of champagne sat on the mahogany bar, already poured. "For you," he said, handing it to her. He didn't pour one for himself. "Vintage. The good stuff. Consider it a welcome gift." "Thank you," she said, feeling silly just holding it. "Aren't you having any?" "Later." He winked. "I'm working the room. This one's special for a special girl." His eyes held hers, and they glittered under the warm study light. It wasn't just friendly anymore. It was intense. A spotlight. "Go on, try it." She lifted the flute to her lips. The bubbles seemed finer than the others. She took a sip, then another, bigger one. Under the weight of his expectant gaze, and tasted crisper, maybe a little bitter at the end. She drained half the glass, needing something to do. "Good?" he asked. "Very," she said, though her head already felt swimmy. The two drinks from earlier were mixing with this one. "Excellent. Enjoy the party, Alara." He gave her arm a light squeeze and melted back into the crowd, leaving her alone in the study. The dizziness came on fast. Not a pleasant tipsy spin, but a sickening tilting feeling, like the floor was rocking. The golden lights in the main room began to streak and blur. A sudden, cold sweat broke out on her forehead. This wasn't right. She'd only had 2.5 drinks. She wasn't a lightweight. She needed air. She needed the bathroom. Stumbling, she pushed her way through laughing bodies, her vision tunneling. She found a hallway, then a door with a simple brass lock. She fumbled it shut behind her, leaning heavily against the cool marble sink. She looked up into the mirror. The girl staring back was pale, her pupils wide and dark. The champagne-colored dress looked garish now. The dreamy feeling was gone, replaced by a rising tide of panic. What's happening? Her thoughts were thick, syrup slow. The reflection began to waver, the edges dissolving into a gray fog. She gripped the sink, her knuckles white, but her hands felt numb, far away. The last thing she saw was the terror in her own eyes before the fog swallowed everything. Consciousness returned in jagged pieces. First, an ache, a deep, bruised throbbing between her legs, then a stiffness in her limbs. The smell, stale cologne and clean linen. Not her linen. Her eyes flew open. She was lying on a massive bed in a room she'd never seen. The curtains were drawn, but slivers of brutal morning light cut through, illuminating floating dust motes in a room done in tasteful, cold grays, and she was naked. Completely, utterly bare, the sheet tangled around her ankles. A movement beside her, a low, contented sigh. She turned her head, a movement that sent a spike of pain through her temple. Lucas Kane lay next to her, propped up on an elbow, watching her. He was shirtless. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face as their eyes met. It wasn't the warm, party host smile. This was something else, possession, amusement. Every cell in Alara's body froze, then screamed. A cold, bottomless horror flooded her veins, washing away the last traces of the drug. Memories didn't come back, just a yawning black void after the bathroom mirror and this aftermath. Her throat was sandpaper. She tried to speak, and her voice was a cracked, broken thing. I didn't want... The sentence wouldn't form. "I didn't want this. I didn't agree to this. What did you do?" Lucas's smile didn't falter. He reached out and patted her cheek twice. The touch was casual, condescending, like calming a fussy pet. "Shh," he said, his voice a soft morning rumble. "Quiet now. You did it already." The words landed like a physical blow. A sentence slammed down on her soul. "You did it already." They echoed in the silent gray room, not an apology, not an excuse, but a cold, final fact, a verdict. The dream wasn't just broken. It had been a lie, a shiny trapdoor that had swung open and dropped her into this cold, hard waking nightmare, and she was alone in it. The rain started just as she stumbled out of the sleek lobby, a cold, steady drizzle that felt like the sky was crying the tears she couldn't. Alara didn't remember getting dressed. She didn't remember the elevator ride down. One moment she was naked in that gray room with his words echoing. The next she was on the sidewalk, clutching a borrowed jacket someone had tossed over her shoulders. The champagne dress, a damp, sour cling beneath it. She ran. Her heels, stupid, pretty heels, clicked and slipped on the wet pavement. She kicked them off, leaving them in the middle of the sidewalk, and ran barefoot. The cold water from puddles shocked her ankles. The city blurred into streaks of gray and neon through the rain and her tears. People under umbrellas gave her wide berth. This wild-eyed girl, in a ruined evening dress, running like the devil was at her heels. Maybe he was. She could still feel the ghost of his hand patting her cheek. Her apartment building loomed, a shabby safe haven. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly the metal scratched the paint. Inside, the quiet was a physical shock. It was over. She was home. But she wasn't. She brought the nightmare in with her, stuck to her skin, in her hair, in the memory of his sheets. She tore the jacket off and threw it on the floor. Then she went to work on the dress. The zipper snagged, and she pulled at the delicate fabric until it gave with a sickening rip. She wrestled the wet silk down her body, stumbling, and the moment it pooled at her feet, she recoiled from it as if it were on fire. She snatched it up, her fingers curling into claws. A low animal sound ripped from her throat as she tore at it. The seam at the side split with a sigh. The strap snapped. She tore and tore, her breath coming in ragged gasps, until the beautiful dress was just a sad handful of shiny rags. She marched to the kitchen, shoved them deep into the trash can under coffee grounds and eggshells, and slammed the lid shut. It wasn't enough. She still felt him everywhere. She stumbled into the bathroom, flipped on the blinding light, and couldn't look at herself in the mirror. She turned the shower on as hot as it would go. Steam billowed, fogging the glass. She stepped in, and the scalding water hit her skin, making her gasp. But it wasn't hot enough to burn him away. She grabbed her loofah and a bar of soap, scrubbing. She scrubbed her arms, her shoulders, her stomach. Hard circular motions that turned her skin pink, then an angry, tender red. The soap stung in places she didn't want to think about. She scrubbed until her skin burned, but the feeling of violation wasn't on the surface. It was deep inside her bones, a cold, dirty secret. She slid down the tile wall, the water beating down on her hunched shoulders, and finally she cried. Silent, wrenching sobs that stole her breath, her face buried in her raw, scraped knees. When the water ran cold, she got out. She wrapped herself in a towel and stood, shivering, in the middle of her bedroom. The world felt too loud and too quiet all at once. What was she supposed to do now? Her phone. It was on the nightstand, where she'd left it to charge before the party, a lifetime ago. It seemed like a relic from a different girl's life. With numb fingers, she picked it up. The screen lit up. A silly selfie of her and Chloe from last week, making faces. Her throat closed up. She should call someone. The police, that's what you do. You report a crime. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Her hand was trembling so much she could barely hold the device. The numbers 911 seemed like a cliff's edge. To say the words out loud, to describe what happened when she couldn't even remember it all. To have to say his name. Her courage dissolved, replaced by a thick, cloying shame. What was I wearing? Why did I go with him? Why did I drink? His questions were already in her head. Instead of dialing, her fingers moved on their own. She opened her internet browser. Her breath fogged the cold screen as she typed, the letters clumsy. Lucas Kane. His handsome, smiling official photo filled the screen. Stats, highlights, charity work. She scrolled, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. And then she saw it, a headline from a sports news site 8 months old. Charges dropped. Lucas Kane cleared in sexual assault case. The world went silent. The hum of her refrigerator, the drip of the shower, it all vanished. She clicked on the link. The article was clinical. A woman, a graduate student, had accused him after a party at his home. Lack of physical evidence. inconsistencies in her story, his high-powered legal team. A settlement reached out of court. Comments below the article were a gut punch. Gold digger. She probably regretted it the next morning. Another one trying to get famous. The phone slipped from her fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself. But the cold was inside now. It wasn't just her word against his. It was her word against his money, his fame, his lawyers, and a public that had already decided. The law had tried and failed. She was nobody. A college student with a ripped dress and a trash can and skin raw from scrubbing. A choked sob escaped her. This was the true trap. Not just what he did, but the impossible walls he'd built around himself. She was alone in a soundproof box. As she sat there on the floor, hollowed out, her phone vibrated on the carpet. A tiny, stupid part of her hoped it was Chloe or her mom, anyone to throw her a rope. She picked it up. A notification for a text message. From a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. The first thing she saw was the picture. It was dim, grainy, taken from a phone in a dark room. It was her. On a white sofa, the penthouse sofa. Her head was lolled back, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. The champagne dress was strapless, bunched a little at her waist. She looked like a broken doll. Below the image, words appeared. They were simple, clean, and they froze the blood in her veins. And a wonderful night. Keep it to yourself, good girl. Surprise gifts are coming your way. Ilara's hand flew to her mouth. A violent, dry heave shook her body. The phone felt like a live wire, like a snake in her hand. She stared at the image of her own unconscious body, at the friendly, threatening words. This wasn't over. He wasn't just protected. He was watching. And he was letting her know, in no uncertain terms, that she was now a secret he owned. The nightmare wasn't confined to last night. It had just stretched out its claws and was settling in for a long, long stay. The world outside Ilara's window kept turning. Cars honked, people walked dogs, the sun rose and set. Inside her apartment, time had stopped and curdled. She stayed in her room, the curtains drawn tight against the accusing daylight. The silence was thick and heavy, like water in a sunken ship. She didn't eat. The thought of food made her stomach clench. She'd take a sip of water from a bottle by her bed, and even that felt like a betrayal to her body, which she now hated. She didn't sleep. When she closed her eyes, she saw the gray room, or the grainy photo of herself on the sofa. When she opened them, she just saw the dark ceiling, and the thoughts would come, circling like vultures. You were so stupid. It played on a loop. Stupid for being dazzled by the lights. Stupid for taking the drink. Stupid for walking away with him. A naive little girl playing dress-up in a world of wolves. But the thought that truly gnawed at her, the one that made her dig her nails into her own arms until they left little red moons, was about the shower. She had scrubbed it all away. Every trace, every piece of evidence that could have, proven something? In that moment, under the scalding water, she'd just wanted to be clean. She'd wanted to erase the feel of him. And in doing so, she realized with a sickening lurch, she had erased the only physical proof that anything had happened at all. She'd washed away the one thing the police, the courts, anyone might have believed. I'm an idiot. The words rasped out of her in the dark room, a dry, broken sound. I destroyed my only chance. She had been afraid. She'd been scared and ashamed, and she'd run. And in running, she had locked the door on any normal path to justice. The article about the last girl proved it. No evidence, no case. And she had willingly, desperately destroyed hers. The hollowness inside her began to fill. But not with tears. Not anymore. It filled with something darker. Heavier, self-loathing. It was a poison, but it was also a fuel. It burned cold and steady. On the third day, she forced herself out of bed. Her body felt both stiff and shaky, like a newborn deer. She walked to the bathroom, avoiding the trash can that held the shredded dress. She flicked on the light and finally looked at herself in the mirror. A stranger stared back. Her face was pale and gaunt. Purple shadows, the color of bruises, hung under her eyes. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her lips were chapped. Her eyes, Her eyes were the worst. They looked empty, like windows to a room that had been cleared out and abandoned. She leaned closer, gripping the edge of the sink. She looked into those dead eyes, searching for the girl who had put on the champagne dress. That girl was gone, eaten. And then something shifted. Deep in the blank darkness of her own reflection, a tiny point of light sparked. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't hope. It was a hard, cold, glittering point, like a shard of ice catching the sun. It was the spark from the flint of her own hatred. If she had destroyed the evidence from that night, then she would have to create new evidence. The thought uncoiled in her mind, clear and terrifying. It wasn't a wish, it was a plan. The police couldn't help her. The world thought he was a hero. She was alone in this, so she would have to do it alone. She would have to go back to the wolf, not as the naive lamb, but as something else. As bait that knew it was bait, as a trap disguised as prey. A strange calm settled over her. The frantic fear was gone, burned away by that cold new fire. She knew exactly how reckless, how dangerous this was. She was thinking about walking back into the lion's den on purpose. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with panic, but with a terrifying, focused energy. She went to her desk and opened her old laptop. She logged into her bank account. The number was pathetically small. Her savings from waitressing, meant for next semester's books, it would have to be enough. She opened a new browser tab, one in private mode. Her fingers, which had trembled so badly trying to dial 911, now typed with a steady, deliberate click. She searched for what she needed: small hidden camera, audio recorder, spy gear. She spent hours. She read specs, compared prices, looked at shipping times. She chose 3 items: a tiny pinhole camera that looked like a button, a voice-activated audio recorder smaller than a coin, a keychain camera that actually worked. She added them to her cart. The total wiped out almost all of her savings. Her cursor hovered over the Confirm Purchase button. This was the point of no return. Buying these things meant she was really going to do it. It meant she was declaring war on Lucas Kane in her own silent, secret way. She thought of his smile. She thought of his hand patting her cheek. She thought of the text message, the photo, the casual threat. Her jaw tightened. She clicked the button. The order was placed. A confirmation email popped up. Delivery in 3 to 5 business days. Alara sat back in her chair. The dim light from the laptop screen lit her gaunt face from below. She looked like a ghost or a vengeful spirit. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shaking. She felt carved from stone. She looked toward the window as if she could see through the walls and across the city to his penthouse. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper, so low and cold it barely stirred the air in the quiet room. "Lucas," she breathed, "your game is over." A long pause. The cold spark in her eyes flared. "My game begins now." The package arrived in a plain brown box with no return address, left by her door like a secret. Alara brought it inside, her heart beating a steady, rhythmic thump against her ribs. Not with fear this time, but with focus. She used a kitchen knife to slice the tape, her movements precise. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, were her weapons. They were shockingly small. The audio recorder was a slim black disc, thinner than 2 coins stacked. The pinhole camera was a tiny lens embedded in what looked like a standard shirt button, with a thin wire leading to a battery pack no bigger than a stamp. The keychain camera was the largest, a matte black rectangle with a tiny hole at one end, attached to a simple ring. It looked cheap and innocent. Alara laid them out on her kitchen table like a surgeon preparing tools. She felt a strange disconnect. These weren't gadgets from a spy movie. They were flimsy pieces of plastic and wire that held the entire weight of her plan, her life maybe. She started with the blouse. It was a simple white button-up, professional looking. She carefully snipped the thread on one of the middle buttons, removed it, and replaced it with the camera button. It was a perfect match. She sewed it back on with careful, tight stitches, guiding the thin wire inside the blouse and securing the flat battery pack against the inner seam with medical tape. It lay flat and silent against her ribs. Next was her purse. It was a soft leather bag with a decorative metal clasp in the shape of a flower. Using a tiny screwdriver from an old glasses repair kit, she pried the fake gem out of the flower's center. inside was a hollow space just big enough for the keychain camera's lens. She positioned it, ensuring the tiny hole had a clear view forward, then glued the gem back in place. The camera body she tucked into an inner pocket of the purse, the on switch accessible through the lining. Finally, the earring. She had sacrificed a simple silver stud. With painstaking care, she used superglue to attach the tiny audio recorder to the back of the stud. It made the earring a little heavier, a little thicker, but from the front, it looked normal. She tested it, clipping it to her earlobe. The weight was a constant, reassuring reminder. Now came the test. She turned on all three devices. A tiny red light glowed on the keychain camera for a second, then went off. Good. She walked around her apartment, placing her purse on the table at different angles, talking softly to herself. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is Alara. Today is Tuesday. Later, she plugged the devices into her laptop. The video files popped up. The view from the purse clasp was wide, a little fisheye, capturing most of her kitchen table. The button camera footage was tighter, showing just her torso and whatever was directly in front of her. The audio from the earring was crystal clear, picking up the rustle of her clothes and the faint hum of her refrigerator. She watched and listened to herself with cold detachment. The girl on the screen moved with a purpose she didn't feel inside. The voice was calm, measured. It was the performance of a lifetime, and she was both the director and the lead actress. She erased the test files. Her mind was a chessboard now, all fear pushed to the edges. There was only the next move. She picked up her phone. The text thread with the unknown number was still there. The last message, his threatening promise of surprise gifts. Her thumb hovered, then began to type. She wrote, deleted, and rewrote. The message couldn't sound angry or calculating. It had to sound weak, plausible. She settled on, I need to see you to talk about that night. Maybe we misunderstood each other. She read it over. It was perfect. It sounded like a girl who was scared, confused, maybe even a little guilty. It was an invitation a predator like Lucas would recognize, the prey circling back, looking for an explanation, or worse, seeking validation. It was bait he would find irresistible. She hit send. The response was almost immediate, as if he'd been waiting. The 3 dots appeared, then the message popped up. Tonight, the old apartment, and come alone. An address followed. It wasn't the penthouse. It was a different place, probably more private. A den. Alara let out a long, slow breath. The chess piece had been moved. The game was on. She walked to her closet. She bypassed the jeans and sweaters. Her fingers brushed against a dress she'd bought for a birthday party last year. It was black, soft, and cut just a little lower, hugged the curves just a little more than her usual clothes. It looked like the dress of a girl who wanted to be seen. She put it on. It felt like a costume. She stood at her bathroom mirror and began to apply makeup. Not the dramatic kind, but the natural look that took effort. A little foundation to hide the shadows under her eyes. A touch of blush to give the illusion of a flush. Mascara to make her eyes look bigger, more innocent. Lip gloss that made her lips look soft and slightly parted. She left her hair down, brushing it until it fell in smooth waves. She studied the final product. The girl in the mirror was pretty, alluring in a vulnerable way. She looked like someone who could be easily swayed and easily comforted and easily overpowered. She looked like perfect bait. She attached the doctored earring. She buttoned up the white blouse over the dress, leaving the top 2 buttons undone. The camera button sitting squarely over her heart. She slung the purse over her shoulder, her fingers brushing the flower clasp. She met her own eyes in the mirror. The cold spark was still there, a glint of hard ice beneath the soft makeup. Her voice, when she spoke to her reflection, was a flat, quiet whisper. "Welcome to the trap," she said. "The contract is signed." She turned off the light, walked out the door, and didn't look back. The building was sleek and modern, not as towering as the penthouse, but whispering of quiet, expensive privacy. Alara stood in the lobby, her finger hovering over the intercom button for his unit. The weight of the earring was a cold, steady anchor. She could feel the slight bulk of the battery pack taped to her ribs. The flower clasp on her purse faced forward. She pressed the button. No voice answered, just a long buzz as the door unlocked. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent and smooth. Her reflection in the brass doors showed a pale, composed girl. Inside, her blood felt like ice water, her thoughts like sharp, clear glass. The door to his apartment was already ajar. She pushed it open. The space was all clean lines and soft grays like a magazine spread. Huge windows showed the glittering city, but the lights inside were low. Gentle, wordless jazz played from invisible speakers. And there he was, leaning against a kitchen island, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Lucas Kane looked her up and down, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. It was the look of a collector finding an unexpected treasure. "Elara," he said, his voice warm syrup, "you look different, very different." His eyes lingered on the neckline of her dress, visible under the open blouse. "I see you've been thinking. Came to your senses, did you?" Elara forced a small, tight smile onto her lips. She let her gaze drop to the floor for a second, playing the part of a girl wrestling with shame. I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice softer, more hesitant than she felt. She took a careful step inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. Click. The sound echoed in the silent room. As it did, her thumb, hidden by her purse strap, found the tiny raised button on its side and pressed it once, then again. The prearranged signal to start recording. The earring was already live. The button on her blouse was seeing everything. The trap was armed. "No talking," he said, gesturing magnanimously with his glass. "We can talk. Make yourself at home. Can I get you a drink? Something to relax." He moved to a bar cart glinting with crystal decanters. Alara's heart hammered against the battery pack. This was the first test. She clasped her hands in front of her, a nervous gesture. "Oh, no, thank you." She gave a little shake of her head, making the earring sway. I can't really drink tonight. I'm still not feeling quite right from last time." She looked up at him through her lashes, injecting a wobble of remembered fear into her voice. It wasn't hard. The memory was right there, a cold stone in her gut. She was baiting him with the truth, dangling the event in front of the hidden microphone. Lucas paused, the bottle of whiskey in his hand. He turned, his expression one of mild, patronizing amusement. "Last time?" He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "You mean the party? Honey, you just had a little too much fun. It happens." He poured himself another finger of liquor, not offering again. He was dismissing it, erasing it. This was what she needed. It didn't feel like too much fun, Elara pressed, her voice a fragile thread. She took a few steps further into the room, angling her body so the button camera on her chest had a clear view of him over the island. The purse in her hand, with its flower clasp eye, was pointed at the space between them. "I remember feeling dizzy, really fast, and then nothing, waking up." She let her voice trail off, thick with implied distress. Lucas watched her, his head tilted. The amused smile never left his face, but his eyes were assessing, like a scientist observing an interesting reaction. He placed his glass down with a soft clink and began to walk around the island, closing the distance between them. "Memories can be tricky after a few drinks," he said, his tone conversational, reasonable, "especially when you're not used to the good stuff. Your mind fills in blanks with silly stories." He was now only a few feet away. Elara had to fight the instinct to step back. Every fiber of her being screamed to run. Instead, she held her ground, looking up at him with her carefully crafted, vulnerable expression. "It didn't feel like a silly story," she whispered. He let out a loud, booming laugh that felt out of place in the soft room. It was a performance of its own. The confident, charismatic star, amused by the little girl's dramatics. "You still remember, huh?" He took the final step into her space. His cologne enveloped her, that same expensive, spicy scent from the nightmare. He was so close she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the cool calculation in his brown eyes. "Sweetheart, you were just way too drunk, but it's okay." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. "We don't need to dwell on a confused little memory." He reached out, Elara's breath hitched, a real unfeigned reaction. His hand, large and warm, landed on her bare shoulder. His thumb stroked the skin there, once, twice. It was a possessive, calming gesture. The touch sent a bolt of pure electric revulsion through her, but she didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her eyes wide on his. "Let's not talk about the past," he said, his smile softening into something he probably thought was charming. "Let me help you make a new memory, a better one you'll actually enjoy." His fingers tightened slightly on her shoulder, pulling her a fraction of an inch closer. The hidden cameras recorded it all, his towering form looming over her, his intimate touch, his dismissive smile. The microphones captured every condescending word, every patronizing laugh. Alara's mind, detached and icy, noted it with perfect clarity. Contact, admission of the event, dismissal of consent, new advance. The trap had been sprung. The predator had taken the bait, and he was performing his dance perfectly for an audience he never knew was there. The first piece of evidence was now silently, digitally, being sewn into place. The game was no longer just beginning. It was in play. You're listening to Inner Echo Stories. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories. His hand on her shoulder was a brand. Alara forced herself to stay still, to not shudder. The part of her that was acting had to be stronger than the part that was screaming. "A new memory?" she echoed, her voice small. She let her gaze drop from his eyes to the floor, as if overwhelmed. "But I don't understand the old one." She looked back up, widening her eyes with a mix of confusion and hurt. It was a look she'd practiced in the mirror. "That morning, you said you did it already." She repeated his words verbatim, feeding them back into the recording. "What did I do? I really don't remember anything." She saw a flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, not concern. It was something closer to smug satisfaction, as if her confusion confirmed his version of events. His hand slid from her shoulder down her arm, a slow, possessive stroke. "You don't remember?" he said, his voice dropping to a mock sympathetic murmur. He leaned in a little closer. "That's a shame. It was memorable." He chuckled, a low, intimate sound. "You were very enthusiastic after you had your special drink. You couldn't keep your hands off me." Alara's stomach twisted. She made her lower lip tremble slightly. "I was?" "Oh, yeah," Lucas continued, clearly enjoying the telling. He was painting a picture for her, a fantasy where she was the eager participant. He thought he was seducing her with a story, rewriting her memory. He didn't know he was testifying. "You followed me everywhere, whispered in my ear. When we were alone, you just melted into me." His thumb traced circles on her wrist now. "Kept saying how much you wanted me, how lucky you were." Lucky. The lies were grotesque. They painted her as a starstruck groupie, erasing her terror and his violation. But each lie was an admission. He was describing something that happened while she was incapacitated. The hidden microphone was capturing every boastful, fictional detail. I said that?" Alara breathed, injecting a note of scandalized awe into her voice. She needed him to keep going. "You did," he affirmed, his smile turning wolfish. He was fully in his story now, convinced he was charming her, overpowering her will with his narrative. "You clung to me and said you loved me. Can you believe that?" He laughed again, as if sharing a private joke. It was sweet, a little intense for first time, but sweet. First time. The words hung in the air, a casual confirmation of the act itself. Alara felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. This was it. The core admission, wrapped in his ego. He mistook her silence for acceptance, for being swept away by his tale. The hand on her wrist tightened, and he used it to pull her just a fraction closer. His other hand came up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His face dipped toward hers. "Let me remind you," he murmured, his breath warm and smelling of whiskey. This was the moment. The acting had to be perfect. Pure instinct told her to shove him, to scream. The plan demanded something else. As his lips came closer, Alara turned her head sharply to the side. His kiss landed on her cheek, a wet, unpleasant smudge. At the same time, she brought her hands up, not to push him away violently, but to place them flat against his chest, creating a small, firm space between them. "Lucas, wait," she said, her voice firmer than before, laced with a believable panic. Not the panic of a victim, but the flustered panic of a girl playing hard to get. This is too fast. I'm still trying to process. He pulled back, his expression flickering with irritation before smoothing into patient amusement. He didn't release her wrist. Processing, he said, his tone lightly teasing. There's nothing to process, beautiful. It's just you and me, like before. He interpreted her resistance as part of the game, a coy act. He was so used to yes that a hesitant no just sounded like foreplay. It doesn't feel like before, she insisted, putting a slight quiver in her voice. It feels new and scary. She looked at the hand encircling her wrist, then back at his face, letting her eyes glisten with unshed tears. It was the ultimate vulnerability play, and she hated herself for it, even as she did it. He sighed, a long suffering sound, but finally released her wrist. He took a half step back, giving her theatrical space. His smile was still in place, but it was tighter now. You're overthinking. Just relax. Let it happen. Alara took a shaky breath, rubbing her wrist where he'd held it. The cameras had seen the grip, the attempted kiss, the evasion. The audio had his entire manipulative script. She glanced at the clock on his wall discreetly. Over 30 minutes. The devices had limited memory, but it was more than enough. She had what she came for, his voice, his touch, his own version of events that damned him. The switch inside her flipped. The scared, confused girl vanished. The cold, calculating architect of this meeting returned. She took a deliberate step back, then another, putting clear distance between them. She smoothed down her blouse, her movements suddenly calm and deliberate. Thank you for explaining, she said, her voice now flat, devoid of all its previous emotion. It was the voice of a business meeting concluding. It was very illuminating. Now I have to go. The change was so abrupt, so complete that Lucas just stared at her for a second, his charming mask slipping. His brows drew together, the patient amusement drained from his face, replaced by pure, uncomprehending confusion. Then, as her words fully landed, thank you. Now I have to go. The confusion curdled into something darker. His expression shut down, his eyes turning hard and flat. The pleasant, predatory host was gone. In his place was a man who was not used to being dismissed, especially not by prey he considered already caught. The air in the luxurious apartment went from charged to frigid in a heartbeat. The shift in her was like a slap in itself. One second she was a trembling, confused girl, the next she was a cold statue dismissing him. Lucas Kane's brain short-circuited. He was used to fear, to awe, to giggling submission. This polite, final thank you was an insult he couldn't compute. His hand shot out before he even thought, fingers tangling in the soft waves of her hair. He yanked her back hard, spinning her around to face him. The satisfaction was immediate and hot. He saw the genuine shock in her wide eyes. You think you're someone? He snarled, the smooth baritone gone, replaced by a guttural rage. You come here, dressed like that, play your little games, and think you can just leave? He put all his weight and all the power from years on the court into the open-palmed slap. The crack echoed in the silent apartment, louder than the jazz music. Her head snapped to the side. A brilliant, stinging heat exploded across her cheekbone, followed by a deep, throbbing ache that radiated into her jaw. Her ears rang, a high-pitched whine drowning out all other sound. She stumbled, her vision swimming with black dots. He didn't let her fall. He kept his fist twisted in her hair, holding her upright. Alara's hands flew up, grappling at his wrist, her nails scraping skin. The struggle was real, a primal, terrified fight for escape. His athlete's strength was immense, an unyielding wall of muscle. Her kicks and twists were useless against his solid frame. In the storm of pain and terror, a single ice-cold thought surfaced through the ringing in her ears. The cameras are on. The microphone is live. Endure, record everything. The tears that sprang to her eyes were 100% real, born of searing pain and the crushing realization of his physical dominance. They streamed down her stinging cheek, hot and fast. But even as they fell, that detached part of her mind noted their value. They were proof. Let them see. Let the camera see the wet tracks, the raw, red mark on her face. Let the microphone hear the hitches in her breath. Please, she sobbed, the word a ragged gasp. She stopped pulling at his hand and instead tried to pry his fingers from her hair, her own hands shaking violently. Please, stop. I'm begging you. It hurts. Her voice broke on a wail, high and desperate. She wasn't just saying it for the recording. She was screaming her truth into the void, but a sliver of her mind hoped, prayed, that the tiny device in her earring caught every syllable of her pleading. Lucas watched her crying, his own breathing heavy with anger and a perverse kind of excitement. The tears, the begging, it was a language he understood. It meant he was winning. It meant he had broken through her little act. Shut up, he growled, giving her head a sharp shake. The motion sent fresh jolts of pain through her scalp. A grim, ugly smile touched his lips. You cried like this last time, too. And then you had so much fun, didn't you? He was taunting her with his narrative again, using her past violation to justify his present violence. It was a confession layered in cruelty. He used his grip on her hair to drag her away from the open space of the living room toward a hallway. Alara's shoes scuffled and slid on the polished floor. She dug her heels in, a feeble resistance. No, Lucas, no. He didn't answer. He just hauled her forward, his other arm wrapping around her waist, lifting her partially off the ground. The world tilted. The camera in her button blouse saw a dizzying view of the ceiling, then the gray wall of a hallway. The one in her purse, dangling from her arm, captured a shaky, bouncing image of his legs, the floor, the doorframe they passed through. He threw her onto a bed. It was larger than the one in the penthouse, a vast expanse of navy silk. Before she could scramble away, he was on her, his weight pinning her down, knocking the air from her lungs. This was it. The nightmare was repeating, but this time she was awake for all of it. The horror was so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. She had wanted evidence, and now she was paying for it in raw, brutal currency. As his hands grabbed and groped, as he used his strength to overpower her frantic, twisting resistance, Alara did the only thing she could. She squeezed her eyes shut tight, blocking out the sight of his triumphant, Zheng-Ning face above her. She bit down on her own lower lip, hard, until she tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The pain was a focus, a tiny anchor. It was to keep from screaming, to keep from giving him the full-throated cry of terror he probably wanted. Instead, stifled sobs and choked whimpers were ripped from her throat. Ugly, raw, desperate sounds. The sounds of someone being broken. The room filled with the noise of struggle, the rustle of fabric, the thump of a knee, his grunts of effort, her muffled weeping. And in the chaos, unseen and silent, the devices recorded it all. The audio in her earring captured every gasp, every sob, every brutal, intimate sound. The camera in her blouse, crushed between them, saw nothing but dark fabric and captured the crushing pressure. The one in her purse, fallen to the floor by the bed, pointed upward at a skewed angle, capturing the violent, shaking motion of the bed, the occasional flash of a limb, a shadow of aggression, a chaotic but undeniable document of an assault. The trap had been sprung with a violence she had hoped for, but was never prepared to feel. The evidence was being gathered in real time, written not in files or statements, but in bruises and tears and in the silent digital memory of the machines she had planted on herself. The cost of the proof was her own body, and she was paying it in full. The sound of the shower running in the ensuite bathroom was a steady, mocking hiss. Lucas was in there, washing her away. Alara lay on the floor beside the bed, her body a map of fresh, screaming pain. Every breath hurt her ribs. Her lip was swollen and split. The side of her face throbbed with a deep, hot pulse. The rest of the aches were deeper, more shameful. Her mind was a whirlpool of panic, threatening to pull her under. But through the chaos, a single command, the one she had given herself before he even touched her, echoed, "Record everything." She couldn't fall apart, not yet. With a groan that was more air than sound, she pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. The world swayed. She focused on the flower clasp of her purse, lying a few feet away. Crawling, she grabbed it. Her fingers, clumsy and shaking, found the secret button through the lining and pressed it, stopping the recording. Next, she fumbled with the top button of her blouse, the camera button. She felt for the tiny, almost invisible seam and pinched it, deactivating it. Finally, she reached up and carefully removed the heavy earring, clicking off the audio recorder. 3 devices, silenced, full. The relief that washed over her was cold and thin, but it was enough to prop her up. She hadn't just endured, she had documented. The thought was a lifeline. She looked around the room, her vision sharpening with a terrible clinical focus. Evidence. She needed physical evidence, things that couldn't be deleted. Her white blouse was torn at the shoulder where he'd grabbed her. She put it back on, buttoning it over her dress, covering the hidden battery pack. Her eyes scanned the floor. There, near the door, was a scrap of black lace, the torn strap of her dress. She snatched it up and stuffed it in her purse. Then she looked at the bed. The navy silk sheets were a tangled wreck, and there, stark against the dark fabric, were stains, a small, rust-colored smudge of her blood from her bitten lip, and other wetter stains. A wave of nausea, hot and acidic, surged up her throat. She clenched her teeth, swallowing it back down. She could not be sick, not here, not now. She stumbled to the bed. Using her nails, she carefully picked at the corner of the fitted sheet until she found a loose thread. She pulled, unraveling a small section, then tore off a square of fabric about the size of her palm, making sure it contained parts of both stains. She folded this filthy, precious square into a clean tissue she found in her purse and sealed it in a small Ziploc bag she'd brought for her lip balm. The shower was still running. She had to go, now. As she turned to leave, the full weight of what had just happened, what she had just collected, crashed into her. The cold focus shattered. A violent, body-racking tremor took hold of her. She stumbled into the hallway, found a guest bathroom, and barely made it to the toilet before she vomited, heaving until there was nothing left but dry, painful convulsions. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the sweat and the sticky feeling on her skin. She was a collection of hurts, a bag of broken parts held together by sheer will. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then used a wad of toilet paper to carefully clean the blood from her split lip. She looked at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. A bruised, hollow-eyed stranger stared back. The left side of her face was already blooming into a purple-red mess. Finger-shaped bruises were darkening around her right wrist. Good, that detached part of her mind whispered. Let them see. She left the apartment without a sound, closing the door softly on the hissing shower. The city outside was still awake, but it felt like a different planet. She didn't go home. Home was where you went to hide, to fall apart. She couldn't afford to fall apart yet. She got into a rideshare. The driver took one look at her in the rearview mirror, the bruised face, the torn clothes, the dead eyes, and didn't say a word. He just drove. The county hospital, please, she said, her voice a rasp. The emergency room. At the ER, the triage nurse saw her, and her expression changed instantly, the routine boredom replaced by gentle professionalism. Honey, come with me, she said, not asking any questions in the busy waiting room. They took her to a private room. A female nurse practitioner came in, her voice soft. My name is Susan. Can you tell me what happened? Ilara took a deep, shuddering breath. The words were like stones in her throat. I was sexually assaulted and beaten. Saying it out loud in this sterile, safe room made it both more real and more manageable. Susan nodded, her eyes full of a quiet, fierce kindness. I'm so sorry that happened to you. You're safe here. We're going to help you. We need to do a forensic exam, okay, to collect evidence. It's your choice, but it's important if you decide to report it. I want the exam, Ilara said, her voice firming, and I'm going to report it. The next few hours were a blur of careful clinical humiliation. They took photographs of every bruise, every scrape, her face, her wrist, her back, her thighs. They combed her hair for traces. They took swabs from her mouth, her body. They collected her torn clothing, placing each item in a separate paper bag. They documented the dried blood on her lip. They offered her a morning after pill and medication to prevent infections. Through it all, Ilara was silent and still, floating outside her own body, watching, as the nurse meticulously built a file, a medical testament to the violence she had endured. When it was over, they gave her a set of clean hospital scrubs to wear. In her hands, she held a copy of the medical report and a case number for the evidence kit. From the hospital, she went directly to the police station. It was late, but the lights were on. The officer at the front desk looked up, and she saw the same shift in his eyes that she'd seen in the nurses, from boredom to alert attention. "I need to report a sexual assault and battery," Alara said, placing the medical file on the counter. "The assailant is Lucas Kane. I have forensic evidence from the hospital, and I have audio and video recordings of the assault and his confession to a previous one." The officer's eyes widened slightly. He stood up. "Okay, ma'am, let's go to a private room. You can tell me everything." As she sat in the quiet interview room, giving her statement in a flat, clear voice, another part of her mind was already working. On her phone, using the station's Wi-Fi, she accessed encrypted email accounts she'd set up days before. She attached the video and audio files, the damning, crystal-clear evidence of Lucas's boasts, his violence, her pleas. She didn't send them to just anyone. She sent them to the investigative journalists at 2 major newspapers she had researched, reporters known for taking on powerful men. The subject line was simple: evidence against Lucas Kane, urgent. She hit send. The digital seeds were sown. Sitting in the hard police chair, her body one massive ache, Alara finally allowed herself to feel it all. The terror, the pain, the crushing violation. But underneath it, like bedrock, was something else. A cold, hard, unshakable certainty. She had crossed the river of fire. She had the proof. The fight was no longer just hers in the dark. It was now a matter of record. Sarah was not alone. 2 days after her call, another email landed in the inbox Alara had set up for the case. It was from a woman named Maya, a graduate student from a neighboring city. Her story was eerily similar. A party, a private drink, a lost night. Waking up in his bed, she had screenshots of text messages from a blocked number sent after she'd tried to ask what happened. "You wanted it. Don't make it ugly." She'd been too terrified to go to the hospital, but she'd never deleted the messages. Then Isabella reached out through the prosecutor's victim advocate, a young artist. Her story involved being lured to a photo shoot that never happened. She had bruises she'd photographed in a mirror the next day, and a forgotten rape kit from a clinic visit she'd been too scared to follow up on. The 4 of them, Alara, Sarah, Maya, Isabella, met in a quiet conference room at the prosecutor's office. The air was thick with shared pain and a nervous, electric energy. They didn't need to explain much to each other. The patterns were the same: the charm, the isolation, the special drink, the gaslighting, the threats. Sarah, the oldest at 28, held Maya's hand as she cried. Isabella, who had a fierce, quiet anger, showed them the dated photos of her bruises on her phone. The young prosecutor, Ms. Vance, listened, her eyes growing harder and more focused with each account. "Your evidence," she said, tapping her pen on the legal pad where she'd taken furious notes, "is clean. Texts, medical kits from the time of the assaults, your own testimony, no illegal recordings. This is what we needed." The narrative shifted. It was no longer just Alara's word against Lucas's. It was a pattern of behavior, a modus operandi. With multiple victims and their lawful evidence, Ms. Vance had the grounds to request something powerful: a search warrant for Lucas Kane's primary residence and his old apartment. The execution of the warrant played out on the news. Footage showed police cars outside the gleaming building, officers carrying boxes out. Lucas's lawyers stood on the steps, giving angry statements about a witch hunt. But their bluster couldn't hide the fact that the law was now inside his castle. And what they found there was monstrous. In a small, fireproof safe in his study, buried under financial documents, was a single unmarked USB drive. When the forensic techs opened it, they found a digital trophy room. Short, blurry videos, taken from what seemed to be a hidden camera in his own bedroom. Different women, all in various states of undress or distress, all clearly incapacitated. One of them was Sarah. The videos were time-stamped. They were his souvenirs. They also found records of extravagant gifts, designer handbags, jewelry, with delivery confirmations to addresses linked to the women. No notes, but the timing coincided with the periods after the alleged assaults. Hush gifts, the prosecution would argue. The legal case against Lucas Kane transformed overnight. The dam broke. The charges against him multiplied, snowballing from the assault on Alara into a litany of counts involving the other women. The evidence was now overwhelming and, crucially, admissible. Alara's rape kit from the second attack provided the DNA. The women's testimonies wove a pattern of predation. The USB drive was the smoking gun, his own hand documenting his crimes. His legal team's strategy shifted from arrogant dismissal to desperate plea bargaining, but the prosecution refused. They were going to trial on all counts. On the day the judge denied bail, citing him as a flight risk and a danger to the community, Alara stood on the courthouse steps with Sarah, Maya, and Isabella beside her. They weren't holding hands for the cameras, they were holding each other up. The media swarm was there, but the questions had changed again. Now they were about this brave group of survivors and a systemic pattern of abuse. Alara looked at the faces of the women beside her. Sarah, who had found her courage. Maya, who had saved her screenshots. Isabella, who had kept her photos. Their strength had filled the hole left when her own evidence was thrown out. She had been the spark, but they were the fire. She looked up at the sky, a clear, hard blue. The fight wasn't over. The trial loomed ahead, a new kind of ordeal. But the predator was in a cage, and his power to silence was broken. She hadn't won alone. Justice hadn't come from a hidden camera. It had come from the cold, clinical evidence of a rape kit she'd endured. It had come from the quiet, years-long preservation of a text message, a photograph, a medical report. Most of all, it had come from the collective courage of women who had been separately broken, deciding to stand together. A reporter shouted, "Alara, how do you update your feels?" She turned, looking at Sarah, who gave her a small, tearful smile. Alara turned back to the crowd, her voice clear and steady. "We got our voices back," and she said. The we felt solid and real. Now we learn how to live with them again. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the small, fierce circle of survivors at her side, and for all the silent ones who might hear them and feel a little less alone. The battle in court was ahead, but the war for their souls was turning. They were no longer prey. They were a pack, and they were walking forward together.